Khan was an ugly weak shut-in who wasted his life playing video games and watching trashy anime until he suddenly got gam-sakaid. His ultra-plot armor allowed him to slay the ugly-ass villain easily, which left him to babysit the bratty windscreen forehead princess, along with 2 weird guards. Will these incompetent heroes be able to deliver the princess to her Prince Charming in one piece? In an unknown battleground, an out-of-place warrior began his bout with a hideous dragon, which probably spawned from the creepiest pits of fiction. After continuing their attacks for a while, the warrior created an opening and began charging his ultimate move. But before he could hit, the hideous dragon fired him with a flame breath, as it couldn't bear to wait for the unnecessary yaps from the warrior. When the warrior got up and tried to yap again, the dragon bitch-slapped the warrior, which ended in a game over. Back in the real world, a shut-in NEET was frustrated after he just lost his game. But while he was sulking, he was invited to chat by a female player on the game. The player introduced herself as Flora, while he introduced himself as Khan. And just as he began wondering why a beautiful character like that was chatting with him, she teased him by asking him to hang out in the real world, which seemed to get all the adrenaline flowing in the incel-brained NEET. After chatting more with the NEET, the lady continued to tease him, bringing out more of his degenerate, and when he agreed to meet her, he suddenly disappeared along with his chair. Meanwhile, in a desert, a group was desperately trying to escape some tanks by riding a horse carriage, but they were immediately reminded how impossible it was, as the carriage was destroyed by a tank blast. Brutes from the carriage readied their swords and prepared to fight the soldiers alighting from the tank, but they were immediately massacred, leaving only one man and the 2 maidens he was protecting. The leader of the soldiers approached the warrior and called out his name, Sanglin. When the warrior realized his name was figured out, he challenged the captain, named Variation, to a duel, and just as they held their swords ready to battle, a mysterious individual fell from the sky with his chair, landing on Variation in the process. After seeing the distraction, the warrior grabbed the maidens, got on the hideous horse, and prepared to run away, but upon receiving a new instruction, he charged towards the individual and dragged him along. When they had finally gotten out of harm's way, they stopped at a forest to gather themselves. The 3 remaining carriage riders immediately began interrogating Khan, who saved their lives, but he refused to answer, as he was more confused about where he was. When he found out he was in a city named St. Piria, he immediately put off the idea of being isekai, as the name was too mid to be considered, causing the youngest member of the group to punch him for disrespecting her city. When he attempted to retaliate, he was immediately faced with a sword from the brute Sanglin, who told him she was a princess. After assessing her, Khan called her an arrogant brat who didn't fit the description of a princess and pointed at the other maiden to be a better description, but he was immediately given a low blow, as he was informed the other lady was actually a man named Mariandel, who had a log like him. Disappointed at the nature of his isekai, Khan began to roll on the floor, wailing, then eventually began considering his options if he were to attempt another isekai. Back at the soldier camp, Variation reported back to his superior and explained to the man, Eric, that a mysterious warrior fell from the sky, catching him off guard. When the other warriors heard this, they were interested in finding the man, so Eric decided that he would immediately take action. In the desert, Khan and the group had continued moving, and after inquiring into why the group was a target, he was told that the princess would be marrying a prince from another country, which the military was against. But Khan was more worried about why a 10-year-old was considering marriage. The princess informed Khan that she was actually 8, causing the NEET to become even more surprised, as he was sure it was illegal to engage in a relationship of that nature. When they had walked for a while, Khan began feeling weary on his feet, given he was reincarnated without his shoes, so they made a stop at a town and entered a shoe shop, where Khan decided to purchase the ugliest shoe known to fiction, just for the fun of it. When they got out, they realized they had been followed by some soldiers, causing them to make a strategic run-and-hit tactic. Before long, they began fighting the soldiers, except for the princess and Khan, who, even though was given a sword, remained a shut-in NEET. After discovering they were outnumbered, with 2 guns and a sword to 40 guns and 10 swords, the group made a run for it, almost forgetting Khan, who was ultimately useless till that point. They got into an underground pathway and prepared to exit from an alternate gate, which, to their surprise, was unguarded. Khan attempted to be useful by going out to check whether the gate was guarded, and after making his check, he gave them a green light, but he was still useless, as the gate did have a guard, who was very much stronger than the rest. The guard introduced himself as Eric Duke, which Khan shortened to ED. Khan made it known to the soldier that he was outnumbered, with 2 to 1, causing the princess to become irritated, as he didn't count himself among. But ED wasn't intimidated, given he had his trusty low-budget Excalibur to assist him in battle. Sanglin and Mariandel prepared to battle the soldier while leaving the princess with Khan, but after clashing with Eric, the two were immediately put down by the warrior, who made light work of them. Hoping he was isekai'd with an overpowered skill, Khan took out his sword and charged at Eric, but he was immediately knocked out like the NEET he was. After getting rid of the trash, Eric approached the princess, telling her it was for her own good. Khan got back up and told Eric he wasn't done, so Eric decided he'd see off the fodder with his ultimate move, which he immediately began charging. But with all that plot armor, Khan wouldn't lose, as he kicked Eric in his ball pit, causing the warrior to fall. Having defeated his first major boss as an isekai hero, Khan took the low-budget Excalibur and left with the group, while a mysterious shadowy woman watched as their story unfolded. The next day, ED, commonly known as Eric, woke up on his bed, wondering where he was and remembering the horrific events of the previous day. Suddenly, what looked like an evil doctor came in and informed Eric that he had lost one of his nuts, causing Eric to turn angry with an evil cyan-like aura around him and a resolve to eliminate Khan, who he remembered as DT. Meanwhile, at a coffee shop in another part of St. Pyria, Khan continued to throw a tantrum about his isekai and told the group he was uninterested in helping them if they commanded him, especially because there was no interesting female in the group. When the princess and brute paid him no heed, he decided to leave the table, forgetting his sword in the process. Back at the soldier camp, Eric had gotten back into shape and addressed his team, who were pleased with his recovery, but after giving them the details of the new mission, the team constantly made use of terms relating to his jewels, causing him to feel like a victim of PTSD, as he had only one nut in the sack. After getting it off his mind, Eric exited the grounds but left with his body slanted, which bothered the team, who had no idea what exactly was bothering him. At the town, Khan was listening to music when he was approached by the maid named Mariandel, who asked him to escort her on a walk, a proposal he didn't refuse. While walking, Mariandel told Khan more about the city and asked why he refused to join their party, which Khan responded to, explaining that he wasn't totally against it, but simply wanted to make his decision without the bratty princess controlling him. Mariandel grabbed Khan's arms and put them on her milkers in order to persuade him, and it seemed to work, as his incel genes were triggered, forgetting the anonymity of Mariandel's gender. Before long, they arrived at a pigeon farm, which housed abnormally large birds that creeped out the NEET. After loading the pigeon bird with a message, Mariandel explained that it was their means of communication, and if he wanted to unisekai himself, he'd at least need more knowledge. At the military center, Eric got into a secret room and spoke with his superiors, explaining the situation and how he'd handle it. After completing his report, Eric set his sights on getting rid of DT, who eliminated one of his nuts and stole his Walmart Excalibur. Back at the town, Sanglin attempted to explain how the low-budget Excalibur, called an Almagear, worked, but he couldn't grasp it, as he, with all his might, could only chop one tree. When the incompetent Khan tried to operate it, he failed woefully and ended up attempting to destroy it for being useless. After a scuffle with Sanglin, the bratty princess appeared and called Khan for a discussion on top of a tower. When they got there, the princess attempted to convince Khan to join them, causing him to admit he was a weak, lucky fool who only had plot armor as a saving grace, but the princess would have none of that, as he saved her on 2 occasions. While they were discussing, the city was attacked by the military, who called out to DT. Eric had arrived with a new tank and was ready to blow DT into smithereens, with his assistants spread out across the town, ready to bring them out. The military continued to call out to their enemies, but Khan and the group remained insistent on hiding from the tank until a bomb dropped out of nowhere, forcing them to run out into the open. With the enemies out in the open, Eric readied his cannons and prepared to fire at DT and his group. But even when locked in, the shots fired were aimed towards Variation and Longhair, who were Eric's assistants, causing the soldiers to panic. The leader suddenly remembered that he was 1 jewel short Eric, so he lacked the balance to properly attack the opponents. But in that lapse, Sanglin rallied up himself and Khan, then attacked the wheel of the tank, causing the first damage. When Khan charged up, he activated the Alma power of the sword. Like a special Hyperion, the battlefield thought it had seen a majestic warrior. But just as Khan was charging towards the tank with his newfound power, he fumbled like Arsenal in the Premier League and dropped his sword, losing aura points in seconds. After gathering himself, he picked back up the sword, which had now turned into a pseudo-hammer, and charged once again towards the tank. But before he could hit, the tank had fired as well, causing an explosion. When the dust settled down, out of the explosion came Eric, who charged towards Khan, but missed due to his lack of balance. After remembering that he had destroyed one of Eric's jewels, Khan prepared to attack the leader once again. So after Eric missed a sky attack, Khan took the initiative and once again hit the leader on his nutsack. Now, in another paralysis, the soldiers rushed towards their captain and prepared to retreat, with the assistants informing Khan and the group they weren't done. After the soldiers left, Khan met the group, who had now put their princess on an alpaca and agreed to follow them, so long as they helped him find a way back. On a mountain somewhere else, the mysterious lady once again continued to enjoy the story unfold, this time releasing a familiar to add to her mystery. The next day, Eric woke up in the same place and remembered the horrific events of the previous day. The doctor arrived again and told Eric he was now nutless, causing Eric to go into a panic. Meanwhile, while on their path to a new town, Khan and the group came across a tiny animal, which looked like a squirrel if it got robbed of its originality. Upon seeing the critter, Sanglin, Mariandel, and the princess appreciated its cuteness, but Khan would have none of that, as he ignored the creature and asked the team to move on. After seeing his team's reluctance to move on, Khan reminded the team that they had a mission, and the animal would only be a burden. When the team wouldn't listen, Khan threw a fruit at the squirrel, forcing it to run away, and the team to move on. At the military camp, the assistants wondered about the health of their captain, as he was defeated by the same opponent and hit in a vital place. That night, the party wondered why Khan overreacted about the animal, which they found so cute. When Khan was getting ready to sleep, he thought about the animal, but immediately got his mind over it, as he knew it would be a burden and intense trouble. But unknown to him, the critter followed them to the inn and was getting ready to cozy up in his room. The next morning, Khan woke up feeling suffocated, and when he looked up, he saw the critter resting on his bed, causing him to throw a tantrum. When the other members of the party got to the room, they saw the cute animal and attempted to appreciate it again. But Khan stood firm and asked them to get rid of it. The princess tried to sway Khan by explaining the animal liked him, but Khan rejected it and asked Sanglin to get rid of it, which the brute couldn't do, as he had a weak spot for animals. When Khan saw the party was useless against the creature, he decided to get rid of it himself, but Mariandel called the animal to his shoulder and told the party he would be responsible for it. Before long, Khan called a meeting on the animal and explained that the animal was a burden, which they would end up regretting. Mariandel refused to listen to Khan's yaps and continued to argue with the animal hater while comforting his newfound pet. When Khan noticed Mariandel wouldn't listen to the other reasons, he set up a trap by asking the party what they would do if the pet became a problem while they were defending the useless princess. But while Mariandel fumbled to answer, Sanglin responded by telling the story of Walmart Arthur and his conquering of the world. While also possessing love for cats, Khan saw the degeneracy in his story and refused to budge, but the party ignored him and left with the animal, which he now saw as a target to get rid of. The next day, Khan went to a hunter's shop and prepared to get tools for his upcoming battle, but he was found out by Sanglin, who pointed his sword at him and made it known there would be consequences. When he attempted a new method of catching the critter in a net the next day, Mariandel caught him in the act. He tried once more by cooking poison, but the princess caught him this time and asked him to try out the food, which collapsed his last stupid scheme. That evening, the party called a meeting to discuss the stupid behavior Khan had been displaying recently and asked why he was against owning a pet. Khan attempted to lie his way out by feigning an allergy to animals and fur, but he was found out when the critter snuck onto his head without him reacting, causing Khan to develop more hate for it. After realizing Khan lied, the princess punched sense into him, causing him to confess his hatred for cute animals. While he was growing up, he saved some kittens from the rain and took them home to his mum, who also catered and took care of the animals. Although his mum wasn't against it, nor did they die, leaving a scar on him. The animals began hating his stupidity and the fact he was a NEET, causing him to become frustrated that the two animals he once treasured now despised his guts. After hearing Khan's story, the party attempted to make Khan love animals by asking him to pet the critter, but just before he could, the animal bit him, causing him to panic and hit his hand on the wall. When Khan saw that the animal was a lost cause, he took out his low-budget Excalibur and turned it to a hammer, ready to smash the critter into a goo. Ignoring the party's warning, Khan challenged the critter to a battle, which he assumed the creature agreed to, so after charging up his sword, he attacked ruthlessly, destroying the inn in the process. When Khan thought he had cornered the critter, he let out another attack, which destroyed a wall and everything in front, but the critter had evaded as it flew out of nowhere and kicked the NEET to the ground, defeating the plot armor-endowed fool. After accepting his loss, Khan left the town with the party and their new critter pet, ready to progress deeper into the new world. Back at the military camp, Eric thought about life without nuts and decided he needed to go home to get himself together. On his way, he was approached by Variation, who offered him a ride to his place, an offer he humbly accepted. After some time passed, the party had progressed further towards the capital, but Khan and the critter still couldn't get along, as the squirrel stole some of his snacks. After watching the bickering, Sanglain asked the team to give the critter a name so it could be easier for people outside the fourth wall to talk about him. The princess suggested a weird name, but it was immediately rejected, as it was too hard for others to pronounce. While the others struggled to choose a name, Khan stopped them and explained that naming took time and understanding, but Mariandel and Sanglain continued to say dumb names, causing Khan to attempt giving it names of his own. When he attempted to check its gender, the critter jumped from the sky onto his face, making it impossible to see it. After laughing off the event, the party prepared to leave, with Khan calling the critter the name Pet. While they left, the mysterious lady watched as her familiar had now hopped into the unfolding story. In another part of the world, Eric and Variation arrived at his family estate and were welcomed by Eric's fiancée, Amelia, who hugged her useless man upon his return. Variation, who saw the sight, was extremely surprised that a stuck-up captain like his had a prospective wife, but was put in more shock as the fiancé grabbed his hand and thanked him for helping her love. When they mounted the stairs, they came across Eric's butler, with the guessable name of Sebastian, who showed Variation to his room. After leaving behind Sebastian and Variation, Eric walked into his room and observed the scenery until Amelia came in and asked how he was faring. When she offered to balm his wound, he thought about how badly she would react if she found out her love had no balls, so he rejected her offer and prepared to go out. After they got in the car, Eric asked why Variation hadn't moved, and Variation explained that he assumed they were waiting for his fiancée. When the butler asked if they were fine, Eric asked the butler to fetch his love, as she would follow them on their journey. While on their way, Eric considered telling Amelia about his lack of jewels, but he ended up ignoring that option, as it had no positivity in store for him. After they got to their destination, Variation went into the river to play with fish, while Eric and Amelia talked about his childish actions. But when Amelia brought up the topic of children, Eric was immediately triggered, causing him to go into the forest and scream in agony at his uselessness. When Variation appeared back, Amelia asked where Eric got hurt, and Variation was unable to give an answer, but explained that Eric was wounded by useless scum. Upon getting back home, Eric and the gang met two of his distant relatives, Gabriel and Limpus, who waited for him to arrive and welcomed him. After catching up, Gabriel offered Eric medicine, which he originally rejected until he was told it could cure any wound, making him accept the medicine. The relatives decided that they would stay over that night and invited Amelia as well, who had no choice but to stay over. That night, while Gabrielle prepared the medicine, Limpus explained the plan to her. The medicine was a drug that increased the urge to exercise, so they would use it to trick Eric into betraying Amelia with Gabrielle, allowing Limpus to swoop her. Before long, Gabrielle gave Eric the drug and set him up to lay down. But upon her attempts to trigger his incel side, he desisted and grabbed her hands to warn her. When her brother Limpus came in, he took advantage and called attention to the others, allowing her to lie more and frame Eric, causing Amelia to run away in tears. After noticing the plot, Variation understood their goal, and Eric challenged Limpus to a duel, aiming to clear his name and right the wrongs. Later that night, the relatives left, and Variation explained to Eric that he needed not accept the duel, but Eric refused and clarified his intention to assure Amelia it was an evil plot. The next day, Eric and Limpus got on the battlefield and set the rules and terms. But just as the battle was about to begin, Limpus called on a low-budget wrestler for help. As if it wasn't bad enough, the help called for help, who also called for help, who called for help until they became an 8-man army. Even with the numbers against him, Eric refused help from Variation and decided to face Limpus's gang himself. When the battle began, Eric easily made light work of the 7 men, forcing Limpus to call out a mutated freaky bird. But once again, Eric refused to accept help. The warrior continued his battle with the bird and was almost cornered until Amelia arrived and showed her support. Upon seeing Amelia, the bird charged toward the lady and the butler, causing Eric to go rage mode till he got rid of the freak. After seeing his army get washed, and himself now at Eric's mercy, Limpus promised to forfeit and confess it was a plot. But when Eric turned around to walk away, the fool attempted to strike a low blow, which had no effect since the opponent had no nuts. When he tanked the weak attempt from the foolish relative, Eric punched Limpus's lights out and returned to his fiancée. After seeing his leader take a low blow with 0 damage, Variation branded Eric Full Metal Balchemist. The next day, Eric and Variation got ready to leave. As Eric told Amelia his goodbyes, their next destination was a place where the holy congregated and wounds were healed. The hot spring baths. In a desert somewhere else, Khan and his party traveled through the harsh conditions, continuing their path to the capital. Sanglain told Khan that they were almost at the city where they would rest, but surprisingly, Khan didn't seem to react. After he was asked why he was not enthusiastic, Khan told Sanglain he saw the brute as a liar, causing Mariandel to interject, telling the party that Khan was overfed. When he heard the allegations, Khan attacked Mariandel by calling him a ruffian due to his lack of fatigue, but Mariandel denied it, stating he was simply a damsel in a man's body. After hearing Khan call Mariandel lame, the princess asked what it meant, which Khan responded to by repeating the same word, causing the princess to assume it was something he didn't like. When Khan asked where the next city that could fulfill his desires was, Sanglain pointed towards the beach city, riling up the once disbeliever. Before long, the party began settling into their rooms, and the moment Khan saw the ladies at the pool, he took off his clothes, ready to go into action. Just then, Sanglain entered the room and intimidated the scrawny Khan with his muscles, while also bullying the poor guy for looking like an insect. Meanwhile, the females had their own discussion while changing, deciding that they wouldn't spend too long in the beach city. After they all got dressed up, the party left for the beach, but Khan was still not satisfied, as he believed he was visually inferior to the other 3. When Mariandel got up in an attempt to console him, a bunch of guys surrounded he and attempted to flirt with the maid. But upon seeing a potential happy day for Mariandel, Khan revealed that she actually had a log, which had no effect, as the guys still followed the maid. A while later, Khan remained on the beach, sulking about his ill luck, till Sanglain came back after taking a nice swim. After seeing Mariandel's crowd, Khan asked why they didn't have any issues with a maid possessing both jugs and a log, which the other members of the party stated they simply ignored. Sanglain continued to defend her by expressing how good a cook she was and how well she did chores. After seeing Khan still devastated by the complexities of Mariandel, Sanglain decided to tell him her story. Mariandel lived as Marian in a temple where he learnt martial arts with his father and brothers. After Marian perfectly performed most of the techniques and some Walmart waterbending, his father acknowledged him as a successor and gifted him his family heirloom, a special blade. Upon seeing their brother's success, the 2 elder brothers became jealous, with the middle questioning why their father preferred age over skill. When the oldest brother tried to force reasoning into their dumb heads, the middle brother refused and hit a tiny butterfly, thinking it made him look cool. Now halfway through the story, Khan asked why the plot was so predictable and easy to read, causing Sanglain to laugh as he continued. At the temple, the father of the brothers was resting, biding his time till his death, but an unexpected mysterious visitor came in, heard his last words, and stabbed him with the knife he handed down to Marian. Later that day, the brothers buried the senile old man in a pot, and when Marian tried to console the brothers, he was immediately attacked by the middleborn, who claimed he killed their father. When Marian acted confused, the middle child brought out the sword and claimed it was used to stab the father, but somehow none of them were intelligent enough to ask for evidence, or how he knew. Marian stated he hadn't seen the sword since the previous day, but the middle child remained insistent, while the first child ate up the lies like an 11-year-old on the internet. Upon hearing the story's development, Khan voiced out the stupidity of all the brothers, but Sanglain continued his story. The next day at the temple, even with all the allegations, Marian was still considered a successor by the people, causing a rift between the 2 older brothers, with the conversation flowing towards the eldest assassinating Marian. That night, while Marian was in his study, he was almost stabbed by his older brother, but he was able to dodge. After hearing the older brother's explanation, Marian explained that he knew both his brothers were useless fools without talent, and he expected them to make a Bollywood drama route. He decided that he would no longer be staying in the temple or training with them. After hearing the complete story from Sanglain, who was now playing with worms on the beach, Khan wondered why the story didn't reflect his choice to be a woman. Luckily for him, the princess overheard and called their attention to herself, who had now rented a beach throne and hired 2 lackeys to fan her. The princess continued the story, aiming to explain why Mariandel made her choice. In a field, Marian was found by a lady named Mariandel, who got him up and running, making it easier to continue his journey. After introducing themselves, Marian and Mariandel decided to go on their journey together, picking flowers, running errands, and living together happily. Before long, Mariandel fell sick, so Marian had to treat her to soup and the likes, making her very happy. But her health wasn't holding up, as she would die soon. Marian sold his family heirloom and decided to continue the journey with Mariandel. But when they reached a riverbank, they would separate. After feeling the calm breeze, Mariandel asked Marian to forget his useless old life and live life for her. Then she passed on, sitting upright in an irregular way, making her seem like Whitebeard if he sat. After hearing the full story, Khan was told that Marian took a female appearance and female name to honor his friend while living life for her, causing Khan to tear up. That night, when Khan was thinking about life on his balcony, he saw Mariandel part with her beach buddies. Before long, the maid entered his room, acting like a drunk and asking for water, which, after she was given, she spilled on herself. Just as Khan attempted to clean off the water on her chest, he realized the jugs were real, but was unable to remove his hands, as Mariandel had grabbed him, not ready to let go. It had now become a battle between a drunk degenerate with no limits and a cautious degenerate who wanted to play it safe. The drunk won and successfully set Khan up in an exercise position, offering him practice ahead of the future, causing Khan to pass out. The next morning, Khan woke up, thinking about the horrible dream, but when he looked to his side, he saw a lady with a stubble on his bed, causing him to flee like a forced bride. When Mariandel woke up, Khan asked why she cheated on the other Mariandel, but Mariandel was confused, as she didn't know who that was. Upon getting to the beach, Khan received an apology from Saenglin and the princess, who admitted the stories were jokes. When Khan asked for the truth, Mariandel said she simply wanted to be a female, but because she felt it would be more fun with Khan confused, she teased him about the night before. In a secret society somewhere hidden, a bunch of elders, feeling like the Green Lantern, hosted a meeting with their faces hidden. They discussed the efficiency of Eric in dealing with the princess and how the princess had help from an Hyperion. After realizing Eric was the strongest, the elders decided they would send secret help who could assist Eric without trouble. Once the meeting was completed, one of the elders went to a secret dungeon to get help from a prisoner. This prisoner was a psychopathic freak, which looked like a goblin made from cheap chemicals, named George. It immediately showed its insane nature when it saw the elder, but the elder ignored the madness and offered it a job to kill the princess and her escorts, which the goblin accepted. When it got released, it promised to do the job, but the guards were still skeptical, as the creature seemed like it couldn't think at all. Khan and his group were on their way to a new town, with Khan constantly asking how the capital would get him to his old world, but because the party was unsure, they could only tell him his fate lay in the hands of the Ixians. When Khan asked why they didn't directly go to the Ixian city, Alvidia, Saenglin explained that they couldn't reach there with their current means of transport, causing Khan to shut up. In the trees, the hideous goblin continued to watch the party while he got ready to deal with them. Later that day, the team arrived at the inn and settled down, as Khan began planning what to do in the capital, but his fantasy was cut short, as he was told they would still travel for 2 more months while trying to maintain a low profile. While the men were discussing, Mariandel appeared in the room and told Saenglin there was an issue with the princess, causing the discussion to end, and the team to immediately head to her room. When they checked on the princess, Saenglin and Mariandel immediately retreated, but because Khan was confused, he needed to be dragged away from the room. After being pulled out, Khan asked why they panicked, which the party blamed on her change, but Khan still couldn't understand what it was. When they noticed Khan's confusion, they told him about the hair strand and how it caused a strange, aggressive behavior in the princess, which always led to peril. Just then, the princess asked for food, causing the party to panic again, this time Mariandel more than others. Before long, they had helped themselves to the kitchen and brought out food that could feed all the guests. But Mariandel still didn't think it was enough, as she asked Saenglin and Khan to fetch more ingredients. When the inn owner came in and asked why they ravaged his kitchen, Saenglin paid the man to temporarily exit the inn with all the other guests, as it would become very dangerous. When Khan tried to stubbornly avoid shopping for more food, Mariandel threatened him with a knife, causing him to follow Saenglin to the meat shop to get more food. When Khan and the brute got back, they saw a feast capable of feeding their party for weeks, which Mariandel still didn't feel was enough, cooking faster than Sanji for Luffy. And with more precision than a Food Wars professional, Mariandel directed the men to take the next batch of food to the princess. After getting to her room, Khan saw a table that looked like Luffy, Goku, and Toriko decided to have an eating competition. Immediately, the men dropped the mountains they were holding, and it immediately disappeared, making Khan bothered. but Sanglain would not risk Khan voicing a complaint that could compromise his life. After delivering the second batch and seeing the princess was still asking for more, Khan let out his complaint and called her a black hole for food, ticking off her second strand of hair. When the princess grasped herself, she asked Sanglain to speak like a cat, as his usual voice sounded like a poor musician from the bottom of the sea. Upon hearing the request, Sanglain was broken and complied, but the princess didn't stop there, as she asked Pete to become a bird, which it also complied with. Later that evening, the team continued breaking down, with Mariandel becoming psycho over pork, and Sanglain speaking like a cat. When Khan saw this, he ignored all the party's warnings and confronted the princess, asking her to be considerate and withdraw her bratty attitude. The next time the party saw Khan was an anticlimactic event, where the princess actually complied and dropped some of her dishes before heading to bed. That night, the hideous goblin George launched his attack on the party when he thought they were sleeping. But after seeing Mariandel up in the kitchen, he attempted a surprise attack, which was immediately caught and dealt with. Bullying George, like he was a cartoon antagonist, Mariandel covered the hideous goblin with ingredients to hide his ugly face, which scared off the freak. After suffering his first defeat, George aimed for the princess, but on his way, he came across another weirdo. Sanglain was still up and asked the ugly freak to leave, adding cat-like terms to his statement, which also scared the goblin. Upon seeing a brute using cute terms, the goblin ran into a nearby room as a form of escape. When George looked around, he saw it was the princess's room and thought it was his lucky break since she was his main target. So he walked towards the master bed, readying his sword to play with his weak prey. Unfortunately for him, the third hair strand ticked, causing the princess to enter beast mode. After running away, the goblin fled into a toilet for safety, where he met Khan, who was currently letting his stream flow. When Khan heard the explanation, he followed the ugly goblin to the room to confirm the tale. But to his surprise, there was no princess and no beast. While Khan looked around, he let go of the goblin, who was immediately victimized by the princess. When Khan looked up to see what happened, he saw the now vicious princess and jumped out of the window like an action move protagonist, not wanting to play with the smoke. On that day, George the hideous goblin failed his task and was nowhere to be found again until many years later, where he was a miser telling the tales of the princess beast to children who wandered around the inn. After settling the beast princess saga, Khan and the party moved to the hot spring town, which basically looked like an everyday carnival. Sanglain explained the town to Khan, telling him about the multiple functions of the hot spring, but Khan didn't still like it because his party consisted of 2 weirdos and a child. The princess told him not to worry about it, as the town also had a pleasure district, which triggered the sock addiction of Sanglain. Before long, the party arrived at their inn, which looked like the classic hot spring, unsurprisingly. When they got in, they were welcomed by the hostesses, who showed them to their rooms. Khan wondered if the baths were mixed, but it was no problem for Mariandel and the princess, who had their own personal baths in the master suite. Sanglain and Khan, on the other hand, were restricted to a smaller room and the men's public bath, which luckily for them was empty at that moment. After getting set, Khan jumped into the hot spring and played around like a kid who just found a special playground, but he was immediately caught by Sanglain, who held him down and asked him to keep cool in the bath. Minutes passed in the bath, and the men leisurely spoke, but Khan's bath would be cut short as his log strengthened up, causing him to panic at its sudden nature. He wondered why he was tingling when there was no female or cute face in the bath, and after awkward dialogues with Sanglain, he exited the bath, aiming to calm down his stallion. After excusing himself, Khan thought about it and remembered one of the functions the hot spring possessed was revitalizing the log of men. But before he could think further, he saw Eric approaching from the distance, causing him to run away. When he was sure Eric had passed, Khan came out of hiding and realized he wouldn't last a battle with the soldier, so he put priority on escape and headed to the female room, hoping they would allow him to enter. Unfortunately, the ladies paid him no heed as he knocked, and Eric was passing by again, forcing him to hide. Khan retreated to the male bath, hoping to find Sanglain, but when he got there, the old man was nowhere to be found, and once again, Eric was in the area, forcing him to hide. When Eric entered the hot spring, Khan came out of hiding and remembered Sanglain wanted to visit the pleasure district. While he tried to escape, he heard Eric screaming, and when he looked inside, he saw Eric trying to force a strong log using the hot spring. On his way out, Khan stopped at the girls' room once again, trying to get them out, but the ladies were receiving massages, rendering them unable to hear his yaps. After giving up on a direct approach, Khan went to the counter and asked the receptionist to ensure the ladies didn't get out of their room. When he saw Eric approaching, He performed his usual escape routine and headed towards the pleasure district, with Eric catching a glimpse of him. At the pleasure district, Khan looked for Sanglin while still trying to hide his active stallion and avoiding offers from nearby shops. When he thought deeply about Sanglin, he remembered the old brute was uninterested in women and traced the old fart to a cat pet shop. Upon finding his man, Khan told Sanglin about all that had happened, making Sanglin realize they weren't safe yet. As they returned, Eric passed by Khan for the probable 10th time, this time needing Sanglin's help to escape. After they escaped and sat in a mini spring, Khan's stallion rested, making it easier for him to walk, but in return, he started glowing, making him more noticeable. Later that night, Sanglin and Goku wannabe Khan rested in their room, hoping to pass time as they slept, but it was an almost impossible task, given Khan was glowing more than an overcharged nightlight. After pondering how impossible living life would be while he was glowing, Khan made the resolve to visit the spring again, and after resting for a while, his light died down. Unfortunately, Eric was also in the bath, creating a problem that he wanted to avoid, and after Eric challenged him, he started glowing again, with his stallion running wild, creating a tense atmosphere. After seeing Khan in that state, Eric got more infuriated and readied to battle, but somehow the foolish Khan convinced the more foolish Eric into suspending the battle till they wore clothes. When Khan wore his robe and saw Eric was still dressing, he hit the soldier with a broom to the head, allowing him to escape with the party that night. While leaving, the party was filled with multiple questions and queries, but Khan decided it was best they left that town without prying into his Tom and Jerry-like adventure. After leaving the hot spring town, the party moved on to the next city, with Khan looking like the Invisible Man wrapped in toilet paper as he was constantly glowing, which would attract attention. When Khan asked why they didn't just ignore the attention, the party reminded him that they were military targets, and attention would only make their journey and his return to his real world futile. Later that day, the party stopped at a city to rest, but while the others ate, Khan was unable to, given he needed to protect himself from the public eyes. Khan got frustrated and decided to attempt eating, as he wouldn't be confined to bread and water like a poor civilian. Unfortunately for him, his light shone, causing him to attract temporary attention, but luckily his team fixed him up before they left the restaurant. On their way out of the city, the people approached them and asked why one of them looked like an off-sale invisible man, causing the team to panic. When the team tried escaping, Khan was immediately robbed of his clothes and tissue cover, showing the masses his glowing light. In an unpredictable turn of events, the people of the town bowed down to Khan, branding him a deity who would save their village. Almost immediately, their head priest arrived and described Khan as the lord who fell from the sky to help their town. But even though Khan knew he was a useless NEET who mysteriously landed in their world, he accepted the claim and began his life as a fraudster. Khan introduced the party as his servants and was eventually granted a special house at the center of the town, where he was fed and taken care of by the people. The head priest entered the house and asked their fraudulent deity, Spark Khan, which was basically the only name the stupid fraud could think of, to come out to address the people. When Khan got out, the priest and people asked him to perform a miracle, which shocked the party, as Khan was simply a good-for-nothing nightlight who mysteriously had a lot of lucky breaks. After remembering he had an abundance of plot armor as an isekai MC, Khan shone brighter, hoping it would satisfy the people, but to his surprise, his light turned blue, attracting beautiful butterflies. The people were amazed by the fraud and asked for him to miraculously fix their fountain, which the fool did by forcing Alma energy from his weapon into the fountain. Khan had now fully deceived the entire town that he was a deity who could perform miracles and save them. Before they allowed him to leave, the people asked Khan how there was existence, causing Khan and the party to perform in a circus-like way, explaining the Big Bang, games, and coincidences. The next day, Khan was called out again to explain the processes of reincarnation, which he once again ignored by simply making use of game terms and allowing the party to interpret. Days passed with Khan constantly giving the people new game terms and circus performances, completely fooling the masses. On special occasions, some individuals were intelligent enough to almost see the fraud, but they remained idiots when hit with his gaming terminology. As more time passed, Sparkon became a well-known deity, with gold filling his house and women to back at his call. But the party was unhappy with his interruption of their journey. One day, the party approached him and excused the women at his service, ensuring they were the only ones present. When he asked why he was interrupted, the princess hit him on his head, while the others explained to him that his fraudulence had gone on long enough. Khan wouldn't listen and told the party he was promised a temple with 48 maidens, which was good enough for him. While the princess reminded Khan of his previous world, The head priest came in and informed Khan that the people needed him to speak. Khan went out and saw that his followers were now in the thousands, making him decide to quit the fraud. After Khan put back on his tissues and outfit, some of the believers approached him, asking him to take them with him. Upon seeing that he wouldn't escape the fraud easily, Khan and the party devised an easy plan that would make use of the population and allow them to easily escape. Khan convinced the people to build an air balloon, which he would power using his Alma energy glow. On the day of escape, Khan bid the people goodbye and gave them another set of gaming terms while glowing. After escaping the people, Khan and the party learned a new lesson about fraud and lies. But their lesson wouldn't end there, as Khan's light died down while causing the air balloon to crash. Meanwhile, the mysterious lady continued watching and enjoying the story unfold around Khan and his party, as it seemed they were now headed for a big surprise. Eric had lost multiple times to Khan, who he knew as DT, but with his resolve now steeled, unlike one of his body parts, and a new drive towards capturing the Princess of St. Pyria, Eric decided to get rid of the party with his full might. While thinking about his strategies, Eric was approached by the mysterious lady. Her name was Flora, and she was an Ixian who offered to help Eric with what he needed to stop being useless. Meanwhile, back at the military camp, Variation arrived and reported to his fellow assistants, KT, Leon, and Gustav, that Eric would be returning to duty after his hiatus the next day. Upon hearing the news, the rest of the soldiers joyously celebrated the return of their leader, until KT claimed he was the right-hand man of Eric, causing an argument in the process. Later that night, at an inn, Pet walked around looking at the sleeping party, who muttered the strangest things while they slept. Mariandel dreamt about lies, Singlin about saving cats like a superhero, the princess about her future as a ruler, and Khan, with no definite dream, simply rose up like a zombie, saying one word. After confirming the party was asleep, Pet left the inn, ready to continue his mischievous escapades. Back with the soldiers, they had gone to a bar for the night, celebrating the return of their captain, Eric, to duty, which seemed like the start of a new fresh chase of their targets. The men took shots at each other, trying to force one another to concede that they were inferior, but they eventually switched topics to choosing who was the right-hand man of Eric. KT suggested they all explain to each other why they were better than the rest, so Leon took the initiative to start first. Leon explained that he was more durable and resilient as he had trained on mountains, sat on nails, roughed himself up and pushed beyond the limits, making him better than the others, but he was dismissed for being an M who simply took pleasure from being tormented. After realizing they were only going to keep teasing him for being an M, he told the group that he had also created a new move that would allow him to easily defeat his opponents. When he was asked about the name of his new move, Leon could only say gibberish that no one, including himself, could understand. Meanwhile, Flora took Eric to a workshop owned by her Takumi friends, where he would get what he desired. After being escorted in by the Takumi, Eric was shown a new Almagear sword that Flora specially designed for him. Back at the bar, the soldiers continued trying to convince each other that one was better than the other, this time being Gustav's turn. Having claimed that he created a special move himself, Gustav told a story of how he went on a recon mission to a bar with friends, aiming to defeat a big bad boss, which was actually just a hostess, by drinking beyond his limits. After his comrades fell, and the hostess ignored him, Gustav stood his ground, beat his limit, and convinced the hostesses to follow him home for some special exercises. When the group heard the story, they realized the drunk fool was simply telling them about how he managed to have his way at a bar. The group began to tease him about his incompetence and hit him where it hurt by referencing his wife abandoning him, which almost caused another argument. At the Takumi workshop, Flora brought out an Alma stone and put it in the Almagear, powering up the weapon, which she handed over to Eric and entrusted not to lose again. Before he left, a Takumi offered Eric a special gift he believed would solve all his problems. The soldier group were still at the bar, getting drunk like skunks, and expressing themselves as the better candidates. KT tried his luck and stated his own reason for being better, but it was the most bizarre story of the night, as the drunkard was fantasizing about having an affair with Eric. The others reminded KT he was a man, but the foolish soldier was so drunk it continued refusing. Variation had enough of it and asked KT to shut up, as Eric was engaged and not a man of that nature. But once again, KT kept on professing love, which triggered Gustav this time. Gustav challenged KT for attempting to threaten a marriage, and KT attacked Gustav for being useless as a husband. When Variation couldn't get them to settle down, he attempted to get help from Leon, but it was to no avail, as the soldier was asleep. After seeing the group wanted to let off their frustration with a fight, Leon got up, as well as Variation, and they decided they would settle it on a battlefield, with Variation determining the rules. Later that night, Variation chose a hunting battle, where they would attack the same dragon, with the winner being decided by whoever hits the finishing blow. Upon hearing the start, the team took off, with Leon striking first, which had no lasting effect on the target dragon. Gustav attempted an attack of his own, but was only able to cut off its tail. KT and Variation struck as well, but the dragon didn't fall. Rather, it retreated, but when they chased after it, a bigger, badder dragon appeared. The dragon aimed a fireball at the group, which blasted them away and rendered them unable to fight. After suffering the attacks, Variation prepared to die, but their glorious leader, Eric, showed up with his new toy, ready to protect his soldiers. The captain charged up his low-budget Excalibur and fired an attack, which easily eliminated the dragon. After confirming his team was okay, Eric told the team his new goal was to defeat DT, together with his assistants, and capture their targeted princess. Now with his team's support, Eric prepared to face the menacing DT once again, an individual who stole his precious jewels from him. The next day, the soldiers played a game of volleyball while discussing the return of their leader, Eric, from his vacation. The team wondered whether he had fully recovered, till Leon asked where he got injured, but none of the soldiers could give a tangible answer. They continued to play their volleyball until Variation failed to volley. At a campsite somewhere else, Khan fetched water for the party, while Sanglin grilled fish as dinner for the day. Mariandel informed the princess that they were left to only beef straps and some dried fruit, causing Khan to tease her about her incompetence with food management and the princess's appetite that rivaled even the strongest gluttons across the world of fiction. When the princess heard his remark, she forced Khan to apologize, putting his feeding for that night at stake, causing him to apologize for his rudeness. After hearing that they would reach a city the next day, Khan talked about how much he missed his old world with convenience stores, comics, and cartoons that would help everyday life. When the party asked what his yammering was about, Khan told the party that they never understood what the delightful taste of ramen or karage was. He retired the night, hoping the capital could get him back to his old world, as the party promised. While the others slept, Khan stayed up, thinking about how the comics and cartoons he left back at home were faring, wondering whether or not they had ended or not. When he saw a shooting star pass by, Khan wished upon the star that he could go home, but he could not complete the 3-time requirement, forcing him to sleep frustrated. The next morning, the party had progressed and reached a big town, where the princess was sure she would enjoy her stay without problems. The team wondered where Khan was, but it turned out he was simply trailing behind, diddling with a wooden curvature he made. When the team asked him what it was, he told them it was a gamepad, which they had no knowledge of, causing them to ignore him and move into the city. After settling into their inn, the princess took a nice soak in her personal bath, while the brute took a shower in the men's bath. When Sanglin was done with his bath, he headed over to Khan's room, aiming to get him to bath as well. But when he saw the boy, it was already too late. Khan had become a psychopath, as he was playing with his gamepad, which had no effect, and saying things that didn't make sense. That night at the dinner table, Sanglin explained the mental state of Khan to the princess and Mariandel, as the psychopath decided not to come for dinner. When Mariandel asked if Khan would be fine without eating, Sanglin told them he only requested snacks and comics. After eating, the party visited Khan with local snacks from around the city and some groceries, which Khan inquired into. When they noticed he wasn't looking away from the TV, they brought out the snacks, which only affected him more. The party bought a jar of insects, lizards, and larvae, which simply put off the already insane lad, causing him to chase them away. Mariandel decided to ask for a snack he wanted, so Khan requested a hamburger with fries and soda. Not knowing what those were, Mariandel received a list and description, which still seemed off from her perspective. The next day, she set off to the market, bought the needed ingredients, and prepared to cook for her now insane comrade. Before long, the almost retarded Khan was called to the dining room to eat his hamburger, which surprised him and almost brought him back to his senses. When he got to the dining room, he was amazed at the burger he saw, and was even more flabbergasted when he saw the fries. Mariandel decided to blow his mind further by preparing soda as well, which brought Khan back to his poor but normal senses. He happily drank the soda and ate the hamburger, feeling like the king of the world. When Khan needed more food, he entered the kitchen to request more, but when he saw the sight of his ingredients, he almost died out of fear. The kitchen looked like the laboratory used to create Frankenstein, with multiple animals lying around and a pig's head melting in what looked like his soda. A scary creature flew past him, and Mariandel caught it using a butcher's knife, scaring the appetite and sense out of Khan. The once half-sane boy returned to his imaginary TV and games, hoping to never eat with them again. Back at the soldier camp, they continued their volleyball, discussing Eric's time at home. When Leon proposed Eric went to the host spring for special fun, Variation denied it, claiming Eric was engaged. The other soldiers were surprised their leader had a fiancée, with KT calling it a political marriage and Gustav calling it a sham. Once again, their discussion was cut short by Variation's inability to volley a ball. Meanwhile, after seeing her first plan fail, Mariandel and the party attempted to use another approach, the comics, but they were lost as they didn't know the content of what the book was. When Sainglain stated Khan described it as a picture book that contained action, drama, emotions, and special exercises, Mariandel cooked up another plan, this time less spooky. Later that day, Mariandel gave Khan a book they regarded as comics in their world. When Mariandel left, Khan opened the book and was immediately taken aback by the content. It was a collection of birthday suits and special activities, which almost killed all the blood cells in Khan's nose. Khan threw out the book and asked the party to leave him be, with Sainglain and the princess wondering what was in the book that made Khan blow up so much. Now wanting to intervene, Sainglain marched into Khan's room and promised him a game to play that he would surely enjoy. That night, Sainglain took Khan to a casino, but rather than play with the slots, he made Khan go into underground gambling on wrestling. Khan thought he would be allowed to place a bet, but instead, he was escorted to a special room unlike the others. In the first match, a contestant named Death easily defeated all his opponents. When Khan asked why he wasn't allowed to bet, Sainglain informed Khan that he was a participant, so he wouldn't be allowed. An organizer came in and asked Khan to follow him into the ring along with the other contestants. In the next match, Khan was around multiple hunks ready to rip him into shreds. Before long, Death was informed of his next opponent in the name of Khan, who miraculously survived the match by pseudo-camping and landing a shot on a worn-out wrestler. When the time for finals came up, Khan's opponent held a chainsaw ready to cut his opponent. Khan requested the referee got rid of it, but after consulting Death as well, the referee deemed it fair, as Khan also had a sword in the match. Immediately, the match started. Khan was on the defense, running from the chainsaw, while his friends simply shouted at him, asking him to win as they placed money on him. When Khan was cornered, he brought out his Almagear and blasted his opponent away, giving him free space and causing his opponent to lose his weapon. But rather than attack, Khan fled the ring, forfeiting in the process and making his teammates lose money. After getting home, Khan threw out his fake gamepad and told the team he'd be more composed, shouting at them to stop torturing him. He complained the night away with his party, except Sainglain, happy that their stupid comrade was no longer a psychopath. Outside the inn, Flora continued to watch her project bloom as she got rid of her betting ticket. Her story was starting to form well, with the protagonist and antagonists fully ready to entertain her more. Eric received the new Almagear from the Ixian Flora and the Takumi. He was now ready to take on his archenemy DT, who had terrorized him constantly. At a freaky castle somewhere in the world, the party prepared to spend the night in a spooky house, but Khan was skeptical, as he assumed there would only be trouble. After going deeper into the haunted house, Khan only felt more and more uncomfortable. When they got to a resting room, Khan saw a mirror reflecting his ugly face, causing him to fall to the ground. After seeing Khan's jumpiness, the princess informed Khan it was a plain mirror and the hideous beast he saw was himself. Khan defended himself and stated it was not a beast before dropping a lame joke, which forced the scene to end. The next morning, Khan and the party headed towards their next city, with Khan feeling rough all over from the harsh conditions of their sleeping grounds. The party continued walking, with Khan and the princess engaging in their useless front and back, but suddenly, a shot was fired out of nowhere, which exploded a large area of land around them. Luckily for the party, Sainglain was able to protect them from the blast. KT had fired a shot from the tank at Eric's order, and Variation led a charge with the other soldiers, aiming to ambush Khan and the party. Barely surviving the blast, the party readied themselves to face the attacking soldiers, with Sainglain pulling out his sword, Khan his Almagear, and Mariandel protecting the princess. The team strategized and chose not to run away, as it was impossible, so on the princess's orders, they attacked the incoming threat. Sainglain got through 2 soldiers, but was held back by Variation, who now carried a special blade strong enough to compete with the brute, while Khan faced off against some inconsequential fodder, who he easily got rid of. Upon seeing Khan's success, Eric and Leon charged towards the lad, hoping to double-team him. But Mariandel prevented that, as she shot towards the progressing soldiers. Unfortunately, the soldiers were superior in numbers, as Gustav fired a shot from above towards Mariandel, which he missed due to his uselessness. Sainglain and Mariandel realized the soldiers had come back stronger and more coordinated, with the help of their weapons, the DDoS, which made them comparable to Almagear wielders. With his team dominating, Eric charged towards Khan and struck his sword on Khan's hammer, causing an explosion, which affected both teams. The princess was protected by Mariandel, but when the party got themselves together at the bottom of the explosion, they could only find a soldier from the opposing team, and not their maid. Meanwhile, the other soldiers searched the river, hoping to find their teammate Leon, but ended up only catching the maid from the party. After a while, Mariandel woke up, tied in front of Eric and the soldiers, but rather than maintain composure or show fear, the maid screamed in delight, freaking out the warriors. She proceeded to manipulate the terms used by the captain from his interrogation to make it look like a weird exercise, which only agitated the soldiers more. When the soldiers questioned the maid more, they realized she was simply stupid, and an M, like Leon, but little did they know the maid was stalling. At the other side of the battle, Leon was tied up before the rest of the party members, who prepared to interrogate him. When Leon boasted of ultimate resistance and inability to be shaken by mere interrogation processes like theirs, the princess stepped up and prepared to make the fool pay for his statement. As she continuously marched on his face, Khan withdrew the princess and informed her it wouldn't work. When the princess looked at the soldier's face, she realized he was simply enjoying his torture, making her reject her decision as her skin crawled. Back at the military camp, the soldiers continued attempting to interrogate the maid, but she kept on being difficult and almost got into Eric's mind until Variation's intervention. After hearing the leader had a wife, Mariandel took it further by offering herself as a second wife while attempting to flatter Eric, but the soldiers simply saw her as a degenerate. When the soldiers realized they were dealing with a stupid M degenerate, they knew they were nowhere near getting an answer that would please them. With Khan in the party, the case was even worse, as their M was saying nothing to reply to the questions from the bad cop Singlain. Khan decided to use a roundabout method by flattering Leon and playing good cop, eventually getting him to say a little about Eric. He also got the soldier to reveal the weaknesses and strengths of all the higher-ranked officers, while tricking the soldier that he had not said anything important, causing the party to see him as a dumb M. Before long, Khan and the party set up a plan in motion to get rid of their pursuers and save Mariandel permanently. The princess suggested Sanglin killed the soldier, but Khan was against it, as it would only give them more reason to chase. Back at the military camp, Eric and Co. received news that Leon was found stuck to a tree, but was accompanied by a note from DT. His archenemy was finally ready to settle the battle between them and get it over once and for all. Later that day, Eric released Mariandel as a sign of peaceful trade and told her to await their final battle, as Khan promised, so the maid thanked the soldier and left for her friends. When she arrived at the castle, she was welcomed by Khan and the rest of the party, who asked her to prepare for their guests. The time finally came, and the soldiers assembled at the castle, ready to ravage their opponents and go home with the victory. On Eric's orders, the army marched into the castle and surprisingly met a very obvious trap, which the fools fell for as they walked into the indicated room. The room had a workout chair, which enticed Leon, who ignored his teammates' warnings and eventually suffered the consequences as the machine clamped his leg. After exiting the first trap, another bait was put down, this time one that would get Gustav's attention. When the soldier tried to prove smart and beat the trap, he was trapped by his victory and hit in the head by a bull, like a Looney Tunes character. Once again, the team came across another trap in the form of alcohol, but Gustav would not let his team fall victim, as he shot the drinks, exploding them in the process. Across the castle, multiple soldiers got trapped, diminishing the numbers of the enemies to only the high rankers. When the high rankers reached the center of the castle, they were welcomed by DT's voice, which only seemed to frustrate them more. DT continued to tease the soldiers, but one of them called him homeless, forcing him to ask Sanglin to release the lotion, which he coveted the soldiers with. DT continued his teasing, and, after getting the reactions he desired, decided to drop the soldiers down to a lower compartment. Upon reaching the lower compartment, the soldiers were now more agitated, asking DT to show himself. When Khan came out, he warned the soldiers not to move, as it would be a risk to their own lives. After Khan thought he had cornered the soldiers, Eric laughed off his threat and told the Need it was no issue. With all his power and might, Eric charged up his low-budget Excalibur and fired at Khan, eradicating the knight and the princess at the same time. With his victory finally sealed, Eric left the castle with his men, knowing he had gotten rid of DT, the warrior who troubled him the most across his lifetime. Flora, the Ixian, watched as her story opened up to the antagonist, gaining a victory over the protagonist, who failed in completing his goal. The night after the battle, Sanglin and Mariandel exited the castle and headed north, with what they had left of their comrades, mourning the loss of their princess. They were being tailed by two soldiers named Gustav and KT, but they were unable to notice, as they were too caught up in their grief. The leftovers from the party rested in an inn, while the soldiers camped across from them, hoping to find out if DT and the princess were really dead. The soldiers observed the party and noticed they weren't doing anything special, but were simply in the blues about their loss. Remembering the events from earlier, Eric had eliminated DT and the princess, which seemed off to Gustav, hence his tailing the leftovers. But KT only came along to ensure Gustav wouldn't slack off at a hostess bar. The next morning, they observed the party again, waiting to see if they would make a suspicious move, but all seemed quiet. While they waited, Gustav recited his monologue, but because it was boring and lackluster, KT interrupted it by passing along hurtful comments, causing a temporary argument between the two spies. Before long, the party started to move again, with the soldiers ready to tail them and see what they were up to, still unsure of their intentions. When the party got to a cross junction, they split up, causing the soldiers to split as well, in order to keep tabs on both groups. KT followed the maid, while Gustav followed Singlain, trying to blend in and remain unnoticed. From a distance, Gustav saw what looked like DT approach Singlain, but when he looked closer, he saw it was just a coincidental lookalike. Singlain and the lookalike discussed for a while before the lookalike was handed money and a note. Upon performing those actions, Singlain and the not-con lookalike split up, forcing Gustav to abandon his first target, Singlain, and go after the other. After tracing the man for a while, he ended up at a cemetery and lost sight of his target, unsure of what to make of the situation. When he met up with KT back at base, Gustav told him all that happened, prompting an insult from his partner, who had successfully followed his target. After thinking about the purchases made by the party, the soldiers began considering that Khan and the princess had truly died, and that their mission was finally over. Meanwhile, at the military camp, Leon approached Variation while he was working and asked the young lad why he felt down about losing his enemy. But Variation denied it. Variation claimed he was simply tired of the burden put on him by the absent soldiers. But Leon tried to convince him to admit he missed his opponents, referencing Eric, who was also supposedly sad. However, the captain was actually so happy he could be considered mad. The next day, the soldiers continued watching their targets live life in a boring manner, causing them to snooze as well, still unsure of what to make of the situation. Gustav tried alleviating his boredom by guessing what the targets were saying, but he was cut short as the words coincided with his fantasies. After watching the targets do nothing for hours, Gustav finally got interested when Singlain was feeding cats while showing his degenerate side, but his interest level spiked further when he realized he could see the maid changing. Upon seeing the incel-brained act, KT prevented Gustav from getting what he wanted and warned him against it, keeping him in check. Later that night, Gustav decided to head out by lying to KT, telling him he was going to investigate the other man, but instead, he snuck off to a hostess bar where he prepared to hang out with his kryptonites. After entering the bar, Gustav hung out with a beautiful hostess and passed the night away, drinking, chatting, and laughing, while he left his partner at the hotel doing nothing. When Gustav had finally gotten drunk like a skunk, the hostess left him to sleep his time away on top of the couch. The next morning, Gustav returned to his post satisfied, but he was still given a heavy beating by KT, who asked him to take full shift for the day. While on his shift, Gustav almost became bored to death watching Mariandel do nothing, while Singlain played with his pecs. When KT returned, Gustav almost lost himself, explaining that the party was uninteresting and no longer doing anything. Just then, he noticed Mariandel headed out, causing him to chase after his target, who he didn't want to escape. Hoping Mariandel would meet up with Khan so he could end his mission, Gustav followed the maid into a bar where she decided to have drinks. After getting into camouflage, Gustav watched the maid drink, while he also indulged himself to make his hiding easier. He had checked around the entire environment and ensured that there was only one way in and out. The maid continued to drink her night away, which was a problem for Gustav, who needed to drink as well if he wanted to stay along with the maid. When he realized he couldn't keep up with the drinking ability of the maid, Gustav approached the lady and put off his disguise, aiming to understand the party's intentions in the city. Upon seeing the soldier, Mariandel was ready to pull her gun, but the officer clarified he had no issues whatsoever. He asked what the maid and brute were looking for in the city, if they were aiming to move on. Mariandel explained that they had failed their mission and let both the princess and their friend down, which was extremely sad for them, so they arrived at the city hoping to do what they could to honor them. With tears rolling down her eyes, Mariandel regretted her weakness and prepared to leave the bar as she had finished her night treat. Before leaving, she placed the bill on the soldiers tab and punched the fart because she hated his existence. The next day, the soldiers packed their bags, preparing to leave, as Gustav believed in Mariandel's words. But when KT asked him how he knew it was the truth, he was suddenly reminded that the maid referred to him as they, meaning she was aware they had been spying on her. They looked towards the opposite room and noticed the party was no longer there, causing them to panic. After rushing over to the apartment and seeing they were absent, the soldiers looked all over the city for them, until they reached the previous graveyard and saw the party performing a funeral for their comrades. Now assured that the party had told the truth, the soldiers left the party, knowing that they were victorious, and the being named DT, alongside the 36th Princess of St. Pyria, were gone once and for all. The remaining members of the party continued their journey to the capital, keeping the memories of their fallen comrades closely to their hearts. If you've gotten to this point, let's confuse the fake fans by commenting, "Baby Goku." Are you wondering if Khan and Marion actually played rough that night at the beach? 'Cause I know I am. Also, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. See you guys next time.